Good morning. This is Alisha Rayne with the Sioux Falls Comedy Podcast, and I have a fantastic show coming up on Friday, July 26th, and I have a fantastic guest today who will be headlining on that show. Let's go ahead, everybody, and welcome Sofia Javed. Sofia, how are you
Hello,
today?
I'm very well. I'm excited to do this interview and I'm excited to come to Sioux Falls. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. No problem. I saw you at Snow Jam. I thought you were amazing, and that's why I had you on the show on Friday. But you actually have two shows in Sioux Falls coming up. Can you tell
Right.
me about the other show?
The Saturday show is the inaugural comedy show at the Chislik Festival in Freeman, South Dakota. So, yeah, I'm going to do that show as well, which is exciting because there's nothing I love more than chunks of meat.
Right. Well, you came to Snow Jam back in January and you
Yeah,
discovered the magic of Chislik.
Chislik.
I,
Right.
I think it's just deep fried steak tips, right?
It's just chunks of meat fried. Yeah, just a bowl of meat.
That's all you need to
Sometimes
know. That's
that's,
all you need to know.
yeah. Yeah, shout out to Snow Jam, RIP Snow Jam too. What a fun festival. That was the last time it happened, correct? In this year
That
in
was the
January?
last festival. That was 8 years,
Great
and
time.
that was the last festival. And yeah, it was a fantastic time. But Dan Bublitz Jr., he just moved on to less cold pastures, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, it was a frigid weekend. This is true. When
It
I was
was.
there,
So
hoping
he's actually doing the Laugh Out Loveland Comedy Festival in the Colorado kind of Denver area, and that's actually happening soonish or around this time, July. So good for Dan. But thank you, Dan, so much for doing 8 years of Snow Jam in Sioux Falls.
that was
It's really helped bring a lot of people out here that wouldn't normally come here, including Sofia
including me.
Javed.
Yeah, and you're right. I did learn about Chislik that frigid weekend in January. And I ended up telling some jokes about it at the end of the weekend after mulling over it for a couple of days, which the South Dakota audience loved. And everyone after the show was coming up to me and they were like, we have a whole Chislik festival here in this other town. I said, yeah, I know. People keep telling me. There was a comedian at the festival who's from the town where the Chislik Festival happens. And he came up to me later at one of the like after events and he was like, oh no. He also said, oh, there's a whole festival and I'm from that town. And I was like, I know, people keep talking to me. And then I made this like just joke. I was like, you know what? Just riding the high of the set that I had just finished. And I was like, you know what? It's my new comedy goal to headline that Chislik Festival. And we like had a good laugh. Haha. I'm like, yeah, that's going to be awesome. And then like a few hours later at whatever after hang we were at, that comedian comes up to me. He's like, hey, were you serious about that? And I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. All right, 2 hours about Chislik if I have to. And he said, I'm from that town and I've always wanted to bring comedy to the Chislik Festival. So I think I'm going to try to make it happen. And credit to him, credit to Kerner. 6 months later, he made it happen. And there's a 1 hour comedy show in between a bunch of the bands that are playing. And there's a few comedians, a few of us doing that show. And I think it'll be really fun. It might be
It-
awkward because we're between bands, but awkward is the best for comedy shows.
So I have you and Kerner are performing Friday
That's
at
right.
the Lucky's Club 224 in the lower level of Lucky's. So that's Friday. And then Saturday, you folks, Kerner and Sofia, are going to be at the Chislik Festival in Freeman, South Dakota. So this is a fun-filled comedy weekend with so much fun happening.
Comedy and meat.
Lots of meat,
My,
lots of
my
meat.
two favorite things.
Yep. So Friday's going to be a variety show. There's also going to be a musician.
So fun.
Benjamin Cadis is going to be on there. And then you guys are going to go down to Freeman on Saturday. So So much fun. But Sofia, enough meat.
Yeah, enough
Let's
meat,
talk
no more
about
talking.
you. So you are in Chicago right now, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. I grew up here in Chicago and then I lived a bunch of other places. I actually started comedy while I was living in Washington, D.C., which is a funny thing because Chicago is such a comedy town, but you know, that's how it unfolded. I started comedy in DC, and there's a great scene there as well. Shout out to the DC comedy scene. And then I came back to Chicago a few years ago, so I'm just exploring the scene here, and it's a great, great scene. A lot of very, very talented comedians in this town.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of cool open mics, lots of cool shows out there. Are you involved in the improv scene out there? Because those are two separate
Uh,
things. It's not all
they
just
They are two separate things, and improv is a very serious scene. I mean, it's fun, but it's a very big deal here. I am just barely, barely involved in the improv scene here. I dabble a little here and there, but mostly I stick to stand up. Yeah.
Is there a difference in comedy styles or even audience reception in DC and Chicago? Is there a difference at all that you
Oh,
noticed?
oh, is there a difference in uh it's funny. I think probably every scene has its slight differences and what I noticed in DC is um like traveling headliners would come through or like other comedians would come visit from other scenes and they're like, "Oh, you're from DC. You must do a lot of political jokes because it's DC." But in the DC scene, I feel like none of the local comedians touch politics that much because I mean, at the time, half of them work in the government during the day, you know what I mean? And so they're like, no, we're not going to touch it. But when other people travel through, other big comedians, they'll be the ones to address political things. But and I feel like maybe the audiences don't want to hear about that as much either. I don't know this. I'm just surmising because they also work in it all day long. Um, so you do get like a certain kind of audience that's um I don't want to say highly educated. They are highly educated, but you have highly educated people everywhere. But in DC, it's like not only are people very educated, but they all work in sort of the same broad bubble of like policy and think tanks and whatever else. So everyone's kind of in the same general big industry.
Yeah.
Um, and even if it's a different vocation, it's still under that umbrella of like this political or policy or government type bubble. So that kind of like I remember when I started in DC and I worked in the government at the time, and it was very easy to just do like my first sets were all a bunch of like I call them cubicle bureaucrat comedy, like just jokes about like the bureaucracy of the office setting in the government, and it did great in DC. Like those audiences ate it up. And then, as a young comic, you start in one place and you start traveling a little. And then I started traveling and I was like, oh no, I got to write more stuff because all my material is very DC centric. But those are the lessons that you grow from, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very niche type of office joke.
Very.
And I understand it too. Like South Dakota, you can get really deep into the weeds of jokes specifically about South Dakota for South Dakotans, and you go other places and they're like, what are you talking about? Like my Christy Nome jokes don't land in other states.
That's part of the reason I'm coming back because I wrote 4 minutes of Chislik jokes back in January and I can't use that anywhere else. So
Yeah.
I got to come back.
Yeah, yeah. So that's interesting. I mean, comedy is escapism, and if you're around it all day, you want to hear about something else. So that totally makes
Exactly.
sense. But I just want to ask this question about because you're from Chicago. Um, I have one word, malort. Can you
Oh
tell
gosh.
me about that?
I have not tried it. There are a lot of comedy shows that feature taking shots of Malort, just for the humor of it. I think it's a fun Chicago thing. If you want, I'll grab a bottle and bring it out to South Dakota, bring it out for the show.
Celebrate Chicago style with a shot of Malort.
Have you had it?
I have. When I was in Chicago, I did like a backyard show once, and we went to
Oh, wow.
some random open mic and had a shot of Malort. So
And did you
it
survive?
wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Like I thought it was going to be like one of those shots you get when your 21st birthday that's supposed to like literally annihilate you. But
Does it taste like, does it have that like Red Bull kind of taste that like,
yeah, it was surprising. Like it was like more like a sour, lemon sour
yeah.
vibe.
But I will say like Chicago loves to be Chicago, and Chicago people will support anything that's like Chicago, right? So we'll talk about Malort a lot. The other nice thing about being based in Chicago is you have access to the like whole Midwest comedy scene. Like I can hop in the car and come to Sioux Falls or Indiana or Iowa, whatever. There's a bunch of clubs that are driving distance for weekend trips or whatever, from Chicago. So that's nice. And I'm going to be exploring that as well.
Road trips, we're always on the road,
Yeah.
us comics. Do you have any favorite kind of like playlists on the
Oh,
road, favorite snacks, any of that stuff?
I usually start with one go through of Hamilton. And if it's a shorter drive, then that's all you need, a good like 2.5 hours or whatever. I do one rock out to Hamilton. I like to do audiobooks, podcasts. I have a podcast series teed up for coming to South Dakota on Friday. Snacks. This is where I let myself eat candy all day. Candy and caffeine. Sugar and caffeine. Uh, I like I like chewy fruity candy and black coffee. So I'm gonna, and then a weekend of eating Chislik, I'm just gonna come back in great health. But
Great
you
health,
don't eat all
feeling
the good
good. So,
sugar
okay,
and
so what's the podcast you have queued up?
someone told me about it a while ago. It's called The Last Cosmonaut, but it's the story of this person, when their government dissolved, they were in space and became a stateless person and etc. And I don't know what happens. I'll tell you on Friday, I guess. Whoever was telling me about this podcast told me that Lance Bass of
In
boy
sync
band
fame.
fame trained at one point to be not an astronaut, a cosmonaut, like trained in Russia, just went through the training program. And I don't know if that's true, but I got to listen to this podcast. I think it's true. And I think there's more info about that in The Last Cosmonaut. Everyone check it out. We'll discuss.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic podcast. And this
Yeah.
has also been a fantastic podcast episode with interview with Sofia Javed, who's going to be here Friday at the Club 224 in the lower level of Lucky's Bar, and then Saturday at the Freeman Chislik Festival. It's going to be a fantastic time. I'm Alisha Rayne. This has been the Sioux Falls Comedy Podcast. We will see you next time. Bye.